Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone, to this WCEE Symposium. Ukrainian Scholars at Risk discuss their research. My name is Geneviève Zubrzitsky. I'm professor of sociology and director of the Weiser Center for Europe and Eurasia. And today I have the distinct pleasure to host 5 outstanding scholars who joined us for a full academic year to present their scholars. And I want to tell a bit about their stories. Many of you have heard their stories, but still for people on Zoom and people who might watch this later on YouTube. When the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began on February 24th, 2022, we very quickly decided to do something, that we wanted to do something to help Ukraine and Ukrainian scholars, and we put together a fellowship with funds we had leftover funds from COVID. We had about money to bring two fellows, and we we put together a program, a formal application program where scholars affiliated with Ukrainian institutions who were still in Ukraine or displaced by the war could apply to join us here at the University of Michigan for a year. And it quickly became apparent that there was even more need than we could satisfy. And so we started knocking on different doors to private donors, institutional partners, community leaders. And we managed, after just a few weeks, to put together funding for 7 fellows from Ukraine. 6 joined us. 1 was not able to come because of family situation. 6 came. 1 returned to Ukraine after 6 months for family reasons, and also to a region that was not under direct attack in Kyiv. And so we spent this last academic year with 5 wonderful scholars who will present the result of their work here today. Before introducing them, however, I would like to name the donors and our partners who made that year possible. So I need some notes because there's many of them. So Region Run Weiser contributed additional funds. We have Thomas Kubr, also another donor, provided a generous gift. We had several smaller donors that I will not name, but that were very important in making this possible. And then we had large donations or sponsorships from partners at the University of Michigan, the International Institute, the Taubman College of Architecture and Urban Planning, the Department of History, the Frankel Center for Judaic Studies, the Ford School for Public Policy, the Weiser Center for Emerging Democracies, the Copernicus Center for Polish Studies. Each gave substantial amount of money that made it possible for us, WCEE, then to put together those packages. During their stay here in Ann Arbor, UMS and the athletic department also provided tickets to several events. That was very important to make them feel welcome. And we had community engagement that was very important. So from the head of Branch 50, the Ukrainian National Women's League of America, as well as the Burns Park community, who were very important in getting cash and non-cash donations, so that when the fellows arrived in Ann Arbor, they had their apartments, they had books and toys and clothes for their children, winter clothing, for example, bicycles and other things that provided a home right from the get-go. And that was very important for us to do this. I would say that we would not have been able to do this without these donors, community members, and institutional partners, but also without the total dedication of the WCEE staff and their I don't know why I get emotional, but I want to give special thanks also to Gitta Kohler, with whom I worked very closely this summer to put together all of these things. Yeah. Gitta put together with Derek the application system, but then worked on visas and housing and flights and coordinating all of the community help. So thank you, Gitta, so much for your help in this. And so today is a celebration of what you've accomplished this year, sorry. But it's also a happy announcement that we were able to renew the fellowship for another full year, so that we will have 4 fellows remaining with us next year. So we're thrilled about this. I will say a few words about what they'll be doing. And we're also happy to celebrate the return to Ukraine by one of our fellow, Anna Taranenko, who's able to go back to Kyiv to be with her family. So we're very thrilled for you that you can go back also. The goal for us is for you guys to be able to go home and be with your families, but also to provide an vibrant intellectual home at the University of Michigan and a safe haven for your children while the war goes on. So the 4 other fellows will be teaching next year, and that's part of their funding package. So they won't be teaching full-time, but they will have an important opportunity to teach at a top U.S. university. And so Oksana Chabanyuk will teach. I'm going to introduce what you'll be teaching next year and then introduce the panelists. She'll be teaching 2 courses. She was already teaching 2 at the Tallman School this year. She'll be teaching Architecture of Soviet Ukraine and 1 course. The second one is Urban Concepts in Eastern Europe in the 19th and 20th centuries. Oksana was mentored by Claire Zimmerman, who's here today, so we're very grateful also to the mentorship. Then Yuri Kaparulin, and I'm putting this so that please to advertise his course at CREASE, The Crime of Genocide in the History of Ukraine, so 1 course in the fall. Katerina Cyreniak-Dolgaryova will teach Disinformation and Propaganda in the Russia-Ukraine War in the fall as well. And Oksana Yurtayeva will teach Theory of the Hybrid Conflicts in the context of the Russian-Ukrainian War. I mentioned our institutional partners, but the mentors were really key in integrating the scholars into their different units, and they were welcomed by different units that were sometimes different than the ones that funded. So I want to name those. So Anna Taranenko was mentored by Professor Brian Weeks, and she was hosted by the Center for Political Studies. Katerina Cyreniak, was mentored by Pauline Jones, and was also hosted by the Center for Political Studies. Oksana Chabanyuk was hosted by the Tallman College of Architecture and Urban Planning, and Claire Zimmerman, whom I just named, was her mentor. Ksenia Yurtayeva was mentored by John Charchari and was hosted by the Weiser Diplomacy Center at the Ford School. And Yuri Kaparulin was at the Frankel Center for Judaic Studies and in the Department of History, and was mentored by Professor Jeff Weilinger. So thank you to all the mentors, many of whom could not be here for a variety of reasons, but very thankful for your mentorship this year. And now, so we will proceed the following way. We will have each scholar present their research, but one of the synergies that emerged this year is that 3 of our fellows worked together on a research project. So those 3 will present together, and the other 2 will present their individual projects. And we will start with Oksana Chabanyuk. Sorry, I have so many sheets because there was so many information to give. So Oksana Chabanyuk is Associate Professor of Architecture at Kharkiv National University of Civil Engineering and Architecture. She will be speaking on foreign technologies and the construction of industrial plants in eastern Ukraine during the early industrialization, so 1928 to 1938. American companies, projects, and engineers. And each will have 20 minutes. And then at the very end, we will have time for Q&A and a discussion with all of our panelists. So Oksana, please.
Thank you so much for this generous introduction. I, first of all, would like to thank you all, Weiser Center, University of Michigan, Tauman College, mentors, students, donors, which helped this happen, that we could have this possibility to continue our professional work at a safe place. And we hope that the victory in Ukraine will be soon. So today I will talk about my research, and I will focus on the research outcomes about the contribution of American specialists in urban development and industry from 1920 and 1930 in eastern Ukraine. And also I will talk about the implementation of this outcomes of the research in my teaching, in my courses, and future steps. So the topic of the transfer of industrial knowledge from the USA to the Soviet Union during the first five-year plan remains to be assessed and analyzed within early Soviet history. The lack of experience of construction of huge industrial plants in early USSR and tasks of rapid growth of industry during this time required the involvement of foreign specialists, and they were coming actually not only from the USA, but also from Germany, Netherlands, Czech Republic, Austria, Switzerland, and others. They contributed to the rapid construction of heavy industrial plants in Eastern Europe and Eastern Ukraine as part of the first five-year plan industrialization, including Donbas Basin, Makiyivka, Gorliivka, Dnipro in Zaporizhia, Dnipro, and Kharkiv. The quantity of foreign specialists in Eastern Ukraine is not clear until now, and those quantities are contradictory. So it's really a very unresearched part of the history of the development of the Eastern Ukraine. The Soviet Union signed the trade and technical assistance contracts between the Soviet contractor Amtorg, so that was the organization in the US, and the American manufacturing and engineering companies between the 1928 and 1930s. Some of those agreements were involving such prominent names as Hugh, Cooper, and Company, which were involved in the construction of Dnipro hydroelectric power plant in Zaporizhia. Also, some smaller manufacturing as Goodman Manufacturing Company in Chicago, Illinois, which were making technical assistance in manufacture of coal cutting equipment in Donetsk. Robert and Schaffer Company, Chicago, Illinois, which were involved in technical assistance in mine construction for coal industry in Donbas Basin as well. Electric Company in the USSR, many of which were done in Ukraine since 1929, and those technical agreements and technical information and assistance, which was about the supply of generators and other equipment to Dnipro HES, technical assistance in design and construction of HEMS turbine works in Kharkiv. About those examples I will talk today as well. In addition, the famous architect Albert Kahn, who was the main architect in Detroit, and his contribution to the construction of industrial plants here in this region was also connected with the work in the Soviet Union and at that time, and in the eastern Ukraine as well. For instance, Ford shops in Dnipro and Kharkiv, foundries in Dnipro, Kharkiv, Lugansk, heavy treatment plant in Dnipro, heavy machinery plant in Kramatorsk, tractor plants in Kharkiv, and also an interest in point-as airplane parts and accessories plant in Kramatorsk that was not constructed. But Albert Kahn architects and engineers performed the consulting services in industrial construction for Kharkiv tractor plant, where as well the engineers were in charge. One of his engineers was in charge of the construction, actually, of first shops in this plant. The Soviet contractor Amtorg that we mentioned, that was organized in 1925, decided to gather the technical information about what was produced in the USA. And this information, as the advertisement of the American producers, was published monthly by Amtorg in New York from 1925 and supplied to the Soviet Union for the as catalogs, as journals. Some of those journals have very interesting information about exact participation of companies from the U.S. in eastern Ukraine. Here we can see I marked those red rectangles that I marked exactly the information about participation of American companies in Ukraine. For instance, Newport News Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company, they were building the turbines in Dnipro HES. So there were really very big amount of list of companies which were working in Dnipro HES into the construction of it. The New York-based design and construction firm Stuart James and Company signed an agreement with the headquarters of Don Vugilya, that the headquarters is located in Kharkiv, and it still now is there, in the end of 1927. And before the first 5-year plan, according to this agreement, the coal and anthracite mines had been designed, and the agreement also comprised the technical and aid in construction and mechanization of existing coal mines. Hugh Cooper of Cooper and Company, as we mentioned, was doing main technical consultant in Dnipro HES. So according to the agreement signed between Soviet Union and Albert Kahn in February 1930, his brother Morris Kahn and 25 American architects and engineers came to Rostroy Project 1, that is State Design and Construction Institute. They came to Moscow. They had actually the office there, and the original project of their office is preserved in the collection of the Albert Kahn collection in the Bentley Historical Library. They came to work and to bring the American experience to spread it among the construction organizations and young Soviet specialists. The Gostroy Project 1 became a huge architectural office and consisted of around 1,000 employees in all its chapters. Among them, there were chapters in Kharkiv, Kyiv, Dnipro, and Odessa. Albert Kahn stated in his letter, in one of his letters in 1930, that effective cooperation with the Project 1 was not achieved for numerous reasons, as there were not enough highly qualified Soviet architects and engineers. American architects had to do most of the drawings by themselves. They had to draw instead of managing the departments at the Institute, and very few among 300 employees at the Institute had any experience, and many of them were students. So one of his projects that he did for Stalingrad tractor plant was also the basis for the construction of the Kharkiv tractor plant, as the foundry shops were consulted and constructed by Albert Kahn architects and engineers. We will have one more time the similar image of the comparison, but it's one of the variations how the project was done for the Kharkiv tractor plant and the Stalingrad tractor plant. And then there were very many similarities, actually, how it was implemented. In Kharkiv, why in Kharkiv? Kharkiv becomes the center of new construction science and science, with one of the oldest Khorasan University that was opened in 1805. Kharkiv was the first capital of Ukraine during 1919-1934. Here are the results of one of the newest construction at that time of public buildings, the House of Projects, in the, now its currently named Svoboda Square, where it is situated, but the University of Karasin now is situated in one of those buildings. It had been changed after the war completely. We lost the constructivism style. And also the Dersprom building, the House of State Industry, that was built as the largest office building at that time. So in the letter about the participation of the foreign specialists in the construction of Kharkiv tractor plant, were mentioned several facts which are very interesting now to be observed, and it's very interesting to read all those handwritings which are above. So it's stamped as secret, not subject to announcement. It is written to the head of Kharkiv tractor plant construction with information on the foreign specialists working in Kharkiv tractor stroy. It states as well that in 1930 there were only 5 foreign specialists. Among them was Leon Svajian, who was the engineer from Albert Kahn's office. And this fact, actually, that he was from Albert Kahn's office was not mentioned in this letter. He also participated in the construction of Stalingrad tractor plant and brought his experience to Kharkiv. Svajian was a full-time employee, and he was also mentioning the difficulties which were noticed by him on the construction. Meanwhile, Soviet engineers also were planning to come to this construction, and they were waiting for the arrival of a large quantity of specialists. At the same time, Soviet engineers also traveled to the USA to gain experience to use in the USSR industry in the early 30s. And rare archival documents confirmed this. In this case, this is the report, one of the reports actually from after the working trip of the engineers to the US. And the report tells about the results of the author's study of contemporary technology and machinery building plants in the USA. But as well, what attracts attention in the beginning, in the headlines, it is written, dissemination not allowed of this report. Data from this report are forbidden to be referenced in the media. Do not give the report to the foreign specialists. Obtain confirmation letter from the workers that they will act according to the above rules. So all those secret reports were produced after all working trips. In the study, this report also mentions many producers from the US, as Siemens, Weston, General Electric Company, Pioneer, Kalaman, Carey, Bendix Aviation Corporation. The largest construction project that at the time in eastern Ukraine, Dniprohes hydropower electric station. Construction lasted 5 years, from 1927 to 1932. But the main technical consultant was Hugh Cooper of Cooper and Company. Among all other engineers, which were head engineers and head architects in the construction. There were 63,000 local workers working on the construction of the Dnipro HES. When construction was finished, the administration actually waited for Cooper's arrival from the US to confirm that the power station could start to work. As well, General Electric was also involved in the technical assistance of the Dnipro HES in Zaporizhia during its construction. And the first big project that General Electric undertook was equipping the power plant of the Dnieper Dam with 9 generators, and 25 General Electric engineers were on hand to supervise the installation. Construction of Dnipro HES in Zaporizhia was using the machinery on the construction that which were highly advertised in the Journal of American Engineering that we just saw in previous slides. As well, the archives in Hoover Institution in Charles Stewart collection have the information about the equipment which was brought from the US to the canteens to feed workers in the Dnipro HES construction, and the most modern American equipment in the kitchens allowed to feed 10,000 workers at a time. Many foreign specialists and engineers from the USA were involved in the construction in Dnipro HES, but foreign specialists, so they lived in the building of foreign consultants of Dnipro Bud, that is the Dnipro Construction Company, and foreign specialists lived also in the so-called American Village in Zaporizhia. So the documents from Hoover Institution say that the houses were built by Americans for American specialists in Zaporizhia. They had their own schools and churches. Children were playing American games in the American community. Only few family houses remain today. The city council is not sure, was not sure how to preserve the examples of these houses, as they have been privatized and were not listed as an architectural heritage. There is not any information in the archive in Zaporizhia about who built these houses and who authored the master plan for this village. The owners are rebuilding the houses by themselves. And General Electric engineers, in cooperation with Soviet technicians, designed the complete architectural and engineering project in Schenectady, New York, for the construction of the HEMS turbine works in Kharkiv. This is a plant that those actually drawings, they are not original from that time. The original package was lost because of the war, but the measurement studies were done for all the buildings, and this drawing is the result of the measurement studies. General Electric factory specialists and production engineers went to Kharkiv as members of the commission to plan the equipment for the plant in detail and to recommend manufacturing apparatus and tools to be purchased. More information about this short outlines soon will be published. I'm very thankful to my mentor, Professor Claes Zimmerman, that she is one of the co-editors of the book where my chapter will be is included already. So we still were working during the autumn semester of the approval of this chapter and the text, and final submission was done in the mid of February. So but this book is a result of the symposium that was organized here at the University of Michigan in 2019 when I was doing my Fulbright here. It was just a coincidence that I had a chance to participate in it, and Claire Zimmerman was also organizing this symposium. So I'm very excited to see the release of the book, but the cover of the book is already published on the website of MIT Press. So now I will talk a bit about the implementation of the results of my research in the 2 courses. So it's really a great opportunity for me, not only to disseminate the knowledge about Ukrainian architecture, which I had the possibility to do in Tauban College for Architecture and Urban Planning, but also to talk in details about the development of different fields of architecture, industrial architecture, public buildings, and residential areas in Ukraine. I also had one more course that was connected with the urban concepts in Eastern Europe, 19th, 20th century. So I will just do a small overview how we, I will not stop, of course, of all of the topics, but all general overview of one of the courses. So we had, during the discussion of development of Eastern Ukraine in the 30s, we had a pleasure to meet and to host the one of the editors of the previous book, Professor Christina Crawford, with her lecture, and she participated in our class, and she also made the introduction, the presentation of our book at the faculty. So here I will just draw your attention to two of those drawings. The tractor, the Stalingrad tractor plan is totally coinciding with one of the part of the Kharkiv tractor plant that just mirrored and turned. So there are also the research done by Professor Christina Crawford about this development. We also were looking on other cities, the development of residential areas in Kharkiv, of new models, of new Kharkiv linear city, and in Zaporizhia as well. We were looking on different styles of architecture, of constructivism, and also functionalism that was mostly spread in the western part of Ukraine before 1939, before it was also became a part of the Soviet Union. As well, we were looking on post-war architecture and postmodernism, as well decommunization, and the residential areas where my expertise in housing actually led me to the topic of the standardization that started in the industrial construction. That's why I started as well to look in deep details of this topic of how the technologies were transferred actually for the standardization. I'm very happy to see in the audience my students, which came to support me as well. Thank you so much, and also about your contribution to the results of the course. One of the courses, Soviet Architecture of Soviet Ukraine. Actually, we were planning to look not only on the heritage, not only on the trends, but also try to compare what was at the same time in Detroit, in Michigan, in the US, in different fields, in development of linear cities or in the development of residential quarters. So, for instance, one of my students, just few, but we also hope that these results will be a part of the exhibition of the conference that the proposal was submitted to Tauman College about the rebuilding of Ukraine. So some of the topics is the archiving of Ukrainian cultural heritage, or the residential areas in the 30s behind the Держпром, and also the comparison between the standardization in the 50s. That some of the projects were actually connected with the topics of master thesis of those students. We also had the project about the new views on the rebuilding of Mariupol that was totally destroyed, and this master thesis I had the possibility to consult this master thesis that will be the defense soon. So the projects were looking on the problems which were not analyzed before. So those comparisons, all levels. So they have kind of state of the art in their results. And for me, it was very interesting to discuss those results as well from their point of view, from students' point of view. So we worked as a team during those two courses. Two more projects from another course which I had in urban concepts. I'm also thankful Victoria is present here. So she was working with the digital space, and that was for me as an experiment how the studies for history of architecture can be combined with some virtual digital tools. So she was doing the exhibition in the virtual space of the gallery in the website, but was inputting there the results of her study about the health of workers in the Soviet Union and propaganda posters. Future steps. I still have a lot of plans for this spring and summer semesters. So I'm waiting for the result of the proposal that we submitted, together as well with the other fellows. So we hope that we will have this opportunity to do the conference about the rebuilding of Ukraine in winter semester. I also plan to continue my research, and this is the future step, that I received the research grant from our institution, from Stanford University, to study the archives in the Hoover Institution of Archives, Library and Archives about Zaporizhia and Kharkiv. And also, I'm excited to have the presentation in the conference in University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, in the end of June, about the journal American Engineering that you just saw a few outlines. Thank you so much for your attention. We're very happy to hear your questions.
Thank you so much, Oksana. So the bar is high, the pressure is on for the next speaker. Yuri Kaparulin, who's associate professor in the Department of National, International Law and Law Enforcement at Kherson State University. He was affiliated with the Frankel Center for Judaic Studies and the Department of History, mentored by Jeff Weininger, and his presentation is Holocaust Studies in Ukraine, Impact and Challenges in the Context of Russian Aggression. Yuri?
Thank you, dear Genevieve. Thank you all for coming today. First of all, I would like to thank the entire staff of YZ Center for Europe and Eurasia for organizing today's symposium and supporting me and my colleagues from Ukraine in this extremely difficult time. And I would also like to thank my colleagues at the History Department and the Frankel Center for Judaic Studies for supporting my research. Today I want to present you my ongoing research project. It's called Between Soviet Modernization and Holocaust, Jewish Agrarian Settlements in Southern Ukraine, 1924-1948. And I began working on this topic during my 2019 fellowship at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. And in my research, I studied the history of the local Jewish community in southern Ukraine and focus on experience of violence against these community members under the Soviet and Nazi regimes during 1920s, 1940s. And I draw attention on the multi-ethnicity and multiculturalism of Ukrainian history, in particular to Ukrainian Jewish relations during this time. In this work, I use the methods of the local and microhistory to capture the background of the era with a focus on a specific event on the ground. Thank you. Sorry. My main research question can be divided into three groups according to the chronology of the narrative. The first group, it's interwar period of 1924-1939, especially how the Soviet policy affected on this local Jewish community. Especially I'm focusing on the events of total collectivization, Holodomor. Next group of questions, World War II times, 1939-1945, and I'm focusing mostly on topic about the Holocaust, how it's carried out in the southern Ukraine. And last one group of questions, post-war period, 1945-1948, and I'm trying to show how Jewish life try to turn back to these lands, but unfortunately, Soviet government pretty changed policy to Jews during these years. I want to give you some brief context of my research. According to the 1926 census, Soviet Ukraine, along with more than 23 million ethnic Ukrainians, was home to more than 2.5 million Russians, more than 1.5 million Jews, almost 500,000 Poles, Germans, Moldovans, Greeks, Bulgarians, Belarusians, and representatives of other national minorities and ethnic groups. And a significant number of them lived in rural areas. And on this map, you can see the established national districts within the territory of Ukraine. And among them were 5 Jewish national districts called Kalinindorf, Novozvatopol, Stalindorf, Freidorf, and Larendorf. And in my work, I focus on the first created Kalinindorf Jewish national district. I will show you on the previous map. Oops, sorry. Yeah, here is it. And more close scale. In my work, I focus on this Kalinindorf Jewish National District and other settlements of Kherson region, in particular because its chronology allows us to follow the changes in Soviet policy that began in the middle of 1920s and their impact on local Jewish and non-Jewish rural population. For your better understanding the scale, I want to point out that the territory of this Kherson region on this map is larger than the state of Israel. And you can see how many lands were provided for Jewish settlement during this time. From the early years of the Soviet Union, the south of Ukraine became a territory where a new social and economic experiment was implemented. Initially, the Soviets planned to resettle between 100,000 to 500,000 Jews to this region. The Soviet government had support from several international organizations, including AgroJoint, established by Jewish Distribution Committee, an American charitable organization based in New York, and Soviet government. For these purposes, tens of thousands of acres of land were allocated in south of Ukraine, especially in Kherson region. One of the main goals of the resettlement was the desire to overcome the crisis of the social and economic life of local Jews, to strengthen the influence of power on this milestone of the population and increase international authority with the involvement of material support. And as you can see, life was not easy for settlers for first years. They were forced to live in makeshift huts and dugouts, but soon most of them were able to build houses. And in middle 1920s, the settlers received considerable material support from United States charitable Jewish organizations. Thus, this part of Ukrainian history is connected to the American history, and American charitable foundations led by Joint put a lot of effort into raising charitable funds to buy all the necessities for people, many of whom were new to farming. In particular, American tractors have become one of the symbols of settlers, and on this map you can, on this picture you can see tractors which were sent to Soviet Ukraine to these Jewish farms from United States. And one of the newspapers in Chicago published article about that Joint was collecting money for these purposes, and just from last year I found some new one type of the tractor from same factories. Yeah, John Deere. Yeah. In 1927, an important event took place, the opening of the first Jewish national district in USSR, and centered in the village of Kalinindorf, formerly Velika Seydemenucha. The district was named after one of the Bolshevik leaders, Mikhail Kalinin. Until the end of the 1930s, this socio-economic experiment did not fully achieve its goals, primarily due to collectivization, political repressions, and changes in the foundations of Soviet national politics from the integration of ethnic minorities to assimilation. And in March 1939, the Central Committee of the Communist Party adopted a resolution named on the elimination and transformation of artificially created national areas and village councils, which were called centers of the enemy of the people. Unlike most Jewish national areas, formally were not liquidated, but finally, next year's Holocaust and World War II destroyed this unique world of Jewish farmer communities that existed in southern Ukraine. Holocaust started on these lands in the first months after German troops occupied the region in August 1941. In 1952, during the post-war trial, Schoch, a former police chief, testified that the SS team consisted of 9 people under the command of the German officer named Lunken, arrived in Kalinindorf to execute local Jews. Lunken ordered local residents to gather in the village. It was then when they separate Jews from non-Jews, and the Kalinindorf Jews were locked up in the dairy farm. The next day, September 16, 1941, mass killing action began. People were brought to anti-tank mode, ordered to undress and lie down, and then Germans shoot them. The clothes of the murdered Jews and their belongings found in the apartments were brought to a collective farm. And in those days, only in one place, there were killing up to 2,000 people. And then empty Jewish farms were handed over by the Germans and other locals. After the liberation of Kherson region in March 1944, Jewish survivors tried to return to their homes after their evacuation. In the early post-war years, they managed to build monuments like this with their own strength and thus took the first steps toward preserving the memory of the tragedy of the local Jews. But after 1948, an unofficial anti-Semitic campaign began in Soviet Union with the goals, among other things, to hide Jewish history. So, in fact, that World War II and Holocaust were crucial destructive forces that ruined a unique phenomenon of Jewish agricultural settlements in Kherson region in particular and in southern Ukraine in general. And this history of Jewish agrarian settlements in southern Ukraine is an integral part of Ukrainian and Jewish history. It's important to remember the history of Jewish people who, driven by idealism and ideology, tried to secure a better future, lived with their Ukrainian neighbors for centuries, made positive contribution to local societies, and finally were murdered in their hometowns during Nazi Holocaust. But it was not last chapter of the history, because after the war, the history of the Jewish victims and survivors were hidden by Soviet policy. In order to restore the once repressed memory of Jewish settlements and their inhabitants by Soviet regime, we decided to make a documentary film, Kalinindorf, which was filmed in the spring and summer of 2020 in Kherson region. In the last part of my presentation, I want to draw your attention to how Russian full-scale war against Ukraine was affected to my work and to topic about the Holocaust history in Ukraine at all. After the full-scale invasion, the territories of Kherson region were among the first to be occupied by Russian troops. During the 9 months of occupation, Kalinivske, former Kalinindorf, and neighboring villages became the front line and suffered extensive destruction. Local residents, including participants and witnesses of World War II, faced new mass violence from the occupation authorities and Russian military. There was no communication with local residents for almost the entire period of occupation before the liberation of the right bank part of Ukraine along the Dnipro River in November 2022. These events become a new layer in the stratigraphy of violence in this region after the Holocaust. Thus, the mass violence in these lands happened again. Its connection to the events of World War II 80 years later may not seem so obvious, but I show it in my work. And I want to mention that Russian aggression against Ukraine is based on propaganda, which, among other things, instrumentalized the history of World War II. The attack on Kyiv in 2022 was called a special operation against Nazi regime. These are horrific and irresponsible manipulations, especially given the Jewish ancestry of President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. The Kremlin leaders tried to justify their aggression by trying to prevent the crime of genocide against the people of Donbass, how they call them, how they call inhabitants of eastern Ukraine people. Thus, they set unprecedented case for the instrumentalization of genocide. However, this manipulation was refuted and condemned by the international community, and the result was opposite, and the investigation into the genocide in Ukraine is now being conducted against Russia. During hostilities, Russian troops attacked Holocaust memorial sites that were completely or partly destroyed. The real condition of many of them is still unknown. The attack on the Russian army on civilian objects have already resulted in the deaths of World War II veterans, Holocaust survivors, refugees among the nations, and others. Many of them went through the experience of evacuation and life under the fire again. The armed forces of Ukraine today include representatives of different nations, including Jews, who are fighting back against the enemy and demonstrating the unity of Ukrainians as a multi-ethnic nation. And in my research, I also try to show Ukrainians as a multi-ethnic nation in previous period of our history. Hostilities have effectively interrupted the traditional of honoring Holocaust victims on the ground, including with the participation of delegations from Israel and other countries. Some of them had been held continuously every year since the late of 1940s. The territory of Kherson region were massively mined during the retreat of Russian troops, and today there is no question of a return to commemorative practice in the coming years. And finally, I want to mention that Russian troops looted cultural heritage, including stealing documents from the State Archive of Kherson Oblast, which contained unique documents on the history of Jewish colonization in the 19th century, the subsequent process of Jewish resettlement during the Soviet era, and documents from World War II times, many of which are critical to Holocaust researchers. These are just a few contemporary issues that demonstrate a connection to the tragic events of the past, World War II, Holocaust, memory policy, my work, and the contemporary situation in Ukraine. Thank you for your attention, and I will be happy to listen to your comments and answer your questions during discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Yuri. And as a reminder, we will have time for Q&A after all presentations, including for those of you on Zoom. There's a large crowd on Zoom, and you will have the opportunity to use the chat to pose questions to specific presenters or to the group as a whole. So our next presentation and last presentation is with three of our fellows. So I will introduce them all now, and each will come after a section of the presentation. So our first speaker will be Ksenia Yurtayeva, who is Associate Professor of Criminal Law and Criminology at Kharkiv National University of Internal Affairs. Then we will have Katerina Cyriniak-Dolgayeva, Associate Professor of Journalism and Vice Dean of International Affairs at Zaporizhzhia National University. And finally, we will have Anna Taranenko, Senior Lecturer of International Relations at the National University of Kyiv Mohyla Academy. So, Ksenia first.
Hello, everyone. And I have a great honor to introduce our group and our group presentation. I already introduced our field, so I'll just proceed with our topic. I didn't know my colleagues 1 year ago, but I'm so happy that I met them here. And I thank very much to the WCEE Center for Europe and Eurasia for supporting us, supporting our research in any possible way during this year. And for myself, I also thank to my core hosting institution, WCEE Diplomacy Center of the Ford School of Public Policy, who made this presentation be possible. We united our research on the topic cyber threats and Russian-Ukraine war, and we specifically concentrate on the case Telegram-based resistance among Ukraine government-led volunteer forces. And I would like to set out a theoretical background of our research. Erupted in February 24, 2022, Russian-Ukrainian war raised their concerns of cybersecurity and cyber and informational security on the new level. Unprecedented disinformation campaigns justifying the invasion and also facilitating psychological coercion of very vast populations, devastating cyber attacks which were combined with the kinetic attacks were really a tip of the iceberg which was a part of the hybrid war against Ukraine. In the light of the above, the new newsmakers hasten to call the Russian-Ukrainian war a first-in-history cyber war. Meanwhile, there still remains a great deal of uncertainty over the issue of recognizing, proper labeling, and evaluating their actions of aggression against Ukraine by the Russian Federation. Generally, the notion of the cyber war and cyber warfare associated with such phenomenon as hybrid war, information and war, and cyber aggression. But this term is not incorporated in their international law provisions, and there is a great deal of uncertainty over it in their scientific field as well. There is no unified definition of the hybrid war, but there is a general understanding by the scientists that their hybrid war is not really unique in their historical landscape. For example, Williamson Murray and Peter Mansour, professors in military history, stipulate that the rivals of the greater military powers, they used the hybrid methods to negate the advantage of the great and superior military powers. They stipulate that hybrid warfare has been an integral part of the historical landscape since the ancient world, but only recently have the analysts incorrectly recognized these conflicts as unique. Frank Hopfen also sets out that the hybrid warfare focuses on the extent of blurring and blending the war forms, modes, and tactics in the same force and or applied in the same battlefield. He also suggests that unconventional and various aggressive methods have been complementing their traditional military methods in the course of the warfare. Talking about their effect of the hybrid war and the concept that was originating from the Western world, it is impossible to not talk about their so-called Gerasimov doctrine. Valery Gerasimov is occupying the post of the chief of the general staff of the Russian armed forces since 2013. And he became famous in the Western, well known in the Western world. In 2013, he published their article, "The Value of Science in the Foresight," and it was overlooked in the time of its presentation, but after their annexation of Crimea, everybody was starting to talk about it, and actually it was republished in the Special Military Review for American Army. Although the term hybrid war is not specifically articulated in Gerasimov's article, today this concept is very much associated with the concept of the hybrid war. Among the new forms of the methods of Gerasimov hybrid conflict measures, he suggested initiations of military operations by groupings of online units in the peacetime. Simultaneous effects of all the units and enemy facilities throughout the entire depth of the territory of the country, engaging of the robotics and high-precision weaponry, warfare simultaneously in physical environment and informational space. Very revealing that this year, in January, Valery Gerasimov was appointed as the commander of the Combined Forces group in Ukraine. And these methods that I just mentioned are really close to what is happening right now in Ukraine. Gerasimov doctrine substantiates the importance of the informational sphere as a battlefield in the new types of the conflict, and their combination of their military and non-military and military efforts on the battlefield. He suggested it will be 4-to-1, which is quite revealing. Nowadays, the national and international information flows largely rely on the cyberspace, a special medium that is incorporated and associated with internet. And that is why a lot of things that happen in internet violence and aggressive actions are called a cyber war. So we could talk a little bit about the term hybrid and how it associates viewed from the etymology of this word. Hybrid is something deriving from heterogeneous and incongruous sources or having a mixed character. And if we talk about the computer world, it will be utilizing involving analog or digital methods and their combination. Projecting to their hybrid war and cyber war, it will be also a combination of military and non-military and analog ways of doing their war. So cyberspace is clearly understood as a new, viewed as a novel battlefield. Cyberspace is a novel and really unique phenomenon that proliferates all spheres of modern life and incorporates interconnects them. One of the first definitions of cyberspace was given by the United States Supreme Court, their legal definition, and it was viewed as a unique medium located in no particular geographical location, but available to anyone and everywhere in the world with access to the internet. Internet is really not a centralized network, it's just a network of computer networks. It is developed quite chaotically and doesn't have a centralized regulation. That is why the structural characteristics of cyberspace is very often connected with the theory of the rhizome, which was proposed by two French scientists in 1980, Gilles Deleuze and also Félix Guattari. The rhizome, unlike any hierarchical root tree structure, has no centralized point and no origin, no particular form or unity. It has nonlinear structure. According to Deleuze and Guattari, the first and the main principles of the rhizome is its connection and heterogeneity. And any point of the rhizome is connected to something else and must be. These connections can be realized in any diverse modes and can be connected to other things that are not really close to the rhizome itself. In this picture, you can see the example of the natural rhizome, which is the mycelium, and implicated to internet, the rhizome-like structure, any bulb or any tubercle of the rhizome has interconnection to the other spaces, to other things, and they work on the reversible basis. The structure of the contemporary cyberspace provides three main structural interconnection that can be potentially used as cyber targets. The first and the most essential one is interconnection of cyberspace to its telecommunicational systems, which is helps to maintain its existential and operational needs. The second interconnection of cyberspace refers to the physical objects that are highly dependent on on the use of the internet connections, which right now range from critical infrastructure to the telesurgery systems. And the third major and probably the most complex interconnection enabled by cyberspace relates to the human behavior. And these peculiarities of the online human behavior is studied by such new disciplinary field as cyber psychology, which is in the infancy stage right now. Besides behavioral impact, cyberspace create interconnection with human mentality and cognition. Besides facilitating so-called virtual community for deciding some complex research and other questions of humanity, it also creates ample opportunities for influencing individuals and collective consciousness, shaping public opinion, spreading targeted disinformation, and exercising other forms of information coercion. Hybrid dimensions of the Russian-Ukrainian war can be viewed through the theory and theoretical background that we had already set down in these previous slides. For example, there is no unified approach about the commencement of the Russian-Ukrainian war, but we can also overlook their official position on this question. The first Ukrainian state has set out that the war has initiated in 2014. This was stated by several official documents produced by our parliament. In 2015, it was the beginning of the aggression was traced to the February 2014, and Russia was recognized as the aggressor state. But regrettably, on the international level, it was also only admitted that it was aggression, as we see in March 2022. But that fact that Ukraine recognized that time of aggression in 2015 already helped our country to get prepared for their large-scale invasion. In this way, we outline in our research several cyber threats posed by the Russian Federation. First, they were cyber attacks. The examples of them you can see, and they started long before the large-scale invasion. The biggest were on the cyber grid of Ukraine, and several attacks on our public institutions, and the attribution to the Russian Federation were recognized even by the American courts in their decision. The second type of the cyber threats were set out by kinetic to cyber operations that were produced after inefficient cyber attacks after large-scale invasion. And the third type of the cyber threats were informational cyber operations, which encounter disinformation, information operations used in the cyberspace. And my colleagues will talk more about this. And all this helped Ukraine to get prepared and produce several strategic documents. Among them, I would like to name specifically a strategy of cybersecurity of Ukraine and informational security strategy of Ukraine produced in 2021. And the main their feature were as following. The cyberspace was recognized along with other mediums as a possible theater of the war. Russian Federation was recognized the main threat to international cybersecurity and international cybersecurity as well. And the main strategic objectives of the mentioned strategy was to form cyber protection for the future war and asymmetrical instruments for deterrence of Russian cyber aggression. And it was interesting that the role of the state was not set just the institution that would set out the rules and some requirements, but it was more set like a cooperation between the private sector and the public sector, and they should work in the synergy. And now I would like to give the floor to my colleagues.
Yes. So, just in light that Senya just presented, we would like to talk more about informational war as a part of hybrid war that Russian Federation started back in 2014 with annexation of Crimea and then with the war in eastern Ukraine. Primarily, it includes spread of disinformation and propaganda by pro-Kremlin sources in traditional and social media. So fast enough, Russian disinformation aggression was recognized and addressed by governmental and non-governmental initiatives in both Ukraine and European Union. And these counteractive measures were prompted by Russian intrusion into foreign countries' business, like Brexit or US presidential elections, let's name. So already in 2015, a European Council created East Strategic Communication Task Force as a special division, and I quote, to address Russians' ongoing disinformation campaigns. Similar goals were set by governmental and non-governmental agencies and organizations in Ukraine and Europe. Let's name some of them: EU versus Disinfo, EU Disinfo Lab, Stop Fake, and in Ukraine, there is now a Center for Countering Disinformation. Two ministries right now work on this in this field in Ukraine, and they are the Ministry of Information Policy, which was transformed in Ministry of Culture and Information Policy, and very powerful right now, Ministry of Digital Transformation.
And so in our research, we posit that Ukraine was prepared for the cyber attacks during the Russia-Ukraine war, and in particular since 2014. So the start of the war is the annexation of Crimea. And so in 2019, the government of Ukraine announced the concept of state in a smartphone, meaning that the state should provide as many e-government services as possible. So back in 2019. Also, in 2021, a special center on strategic communications was set up at the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy of Ukraine. And also in 2021, the president signed the law on critical infrastructure. Also in 2021, a special concept on artificial intelligence was approved. Also, by the end of 2021, the Ministry of Digital Transformation announced as one of its achievements by the end of the year the application on portal DIA. In DIA, it's a e-government services portal and an application where, and so the number of users were 12 million people. And considering that Ukraine's population is, let's say, 40 million people, like 40 million, it's almost like 1/3, 1/4 of the entire population, which is a success. And so in 2021, Ukraine was among top 25 countries in the world by the level of cybersecurity, according to National Cybersecurity Index, NCSI. And so among top priorities for 2021-2023, it was announced by the government that the share of IT in Ukraine's GDP should be at the rate of 10%. And also, we conduct our research also in line with the fact that the civil society development is crucial for Ukrainian politics, and the democratization processes in Ukraine are so vivid, and in fact, the current war can be analyzed through the prism of the global confrontation between autocracy and democracy. And so civil society movements have been playing an active role in Ukrainian politics for a long time, decades. And as the civil society push for Euro-Atlantic integration has shown Ukraine's determination to promote democratic reforms. And in particular, so we are on our way. And so according to Democracy Index 2021, Ukraine is on the 86th place out of 167 countries, and the regime type is hybrid currently. But we are actually, well, moving along. And so elections in particular is a crucial component of a democracy. And so regarding Ukrainian latest parliamentary and presidential elections, those took place in 2019, and both were characterized as fair by the OCE election observation mission in particular. And so, so basically it happened during wartime, 2019, and yet we see this. And so in June 2022, last year, after the start of the full-scale Russian invasion, Ukraine obtained the status of a candidate for accession to the European Union. And in February this year, so slightly, well, okay, in a few over half a year, the EU leaders acknowledged the considerable efforts that Ukraine has demonstrated toward meeting the objectives underpinning its candidacy, its candidate status for the European membership. And so civil society activism complements the successes of the Ukrainian army, Ukrainian armed forces on the battlefield. And in particular, volunteer movement is helpful in countering challenges of disinformation and propaganda. And one of these important initiatives in this regard is mobilizing volunteers through social networks such as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Viber, and Telegram.
So our specific attention is paid to Telegram as a battlefield in Russia-Ukraine war. It's very important to note that among all social media used in Ukraine as a news source, Telegram obtained the first position. According to a national survey, as of July 2022, almost 77% of Ukrainians used social media as news source, and among this number, 65% used Telegram as a primary source of news. Audience in Telegram, in average Telegram channel in Ukraine doubled between the time of February 23 and July 23, like first half of the first year of the war. Telegram provides obvious benefits for its users. First of all, it doesn't use any algorithm for news feed, for structuring the news feed, no advertising, and it allows to create channels and accounts anonymously. So in Ukraine, the Telegram is primarily used for personal communication, for messaging between people, and for getting news and very important information from official sources, from government and non-governmental organizations. During the war, Telegram also addressed some threats, cyber and kinetic threats via this social media. Such cyber threats as spread of disinformation, propaganda, hate speech, hostile content, and planning terroristic attacks. And such kinetic threats as using chatbots, for example, e-enemy. This is a chatbot created by the Ministry of Digital Transformation for reporting troops' location and movement of the enemy, like the places, the sizes, and especially also important places and sizes of shelling of some of the sites. Taking into account all the theoretical background and this special role that Telegram play in Russia-Ukraine war, we set the aim of our research as to determine how Ukraine addresses Russian cyber threats through Telegram-based resistance among Ukrainian government-led volunteer forces.
And so for the purposes of our research, so the three of us, our research team, we identified 2 Telegram channels for our research. And so we looked at, the first one is Stop Russia channel Mriya, and the second one is Internet Armed Forces of Ukraine, Internet Війська України. And so the first one was created on the 26th of February, 2022, so after 2 days after the start of the full-scale invasion. And As of March 2023, so 1 year after, the average monthly number of subscribers is 878,000 subscribers, so slightly under 300,000 people. And this number is slightly fluctuating because people can subscribe and unsubscribe freely. And the typical tasks are to report Russian and pro-Russian channels and social media pages spreading disinformation in order to have them blocked. So basically to report like a certain channel or page. And the leading agency supporting this channel is Cyber Police of Ukraine. And the second channel, the Internet Armed Forces of Ukraine, was created on February 27th, so after like 3 days after the full-scale Russian invasion, so quite quickly, we can say. And so as of March 2023, the average monthly number of subscribers is 80,000 people, so slightly under 100,000 people. And so in comparison with the first channel, so this one has less subscribers. We can see almost 3 times less. So less posts. However, the instructions provided to the volunteers, the subscribers, are more elaborate, and typical tasks are more complicated. For example, address international politicians, companies, influencers in order to help stopping Russian aggression and gain different kinds of support for Ukraine. And the lead agencies supporting this channel are the Ministry of Digital Transformation and the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy of Ukraine. And further, so the next chart, you see the dynamics of the growth of the number of subscribers of the first channel, the Stop Russia channel, Mria. And so you can see that from the start, there was like a increase in the number of subscribers, so approximately for half a year until August 2022. And then you can also see that there was growth, and currently, as of now, there's the situation, well, pretty much the number is stable at the level of 280,000 people. And as to the second one, Internet Armed Forces of Ukraine, so the situation is a little bit different regarding the dynamics of the growth of the number of subscribers. So we saw like a rise at the beginning, so April last year, and then there was a decline in the number of subscribers, and currently it's also kind of stable at the level of like 80,000 people.
Okay, and research question. Anna, do you want to comment that more?
No, sure.
Okay, so we taking into account that we all just heard, we set 2 main research questions with some of the sub-questions. So first research question is, what steps has Ukraine been taking to address Russian cyber aggression after full-scale invasion? And we also wanted to find out what types of cyber actions are used by Ukraine in countering cyber aggression by Russia. And specifically, we wanted to take a look in what ways has the Telegram been used as a platform of countering Russian aggression, and what types of strategic communication are used by Ukrainian government forces, volunteering forces led by Ukrainian government in Telegram as a cyber warfare platform. And to answer these questions, we used such methodology as the method of content analysis, conceptual content analysis. We wanted to identify the existence and frequency of appearance of any concepts and trends in Ukrainian cyber counteracting activities. So time frame we used was the first year of war, of the full-scale invasion, actually, 2022, since the emergency, since the beginning of working on these Telegram channels. So we used systematic probability sampling, and sample comprised from the data from each first week, a full week from Monday to Sunday of the first month of each quarter of the year. So we researched the first week of March, June, September, and December. We were looking at the posts, a post as a unit of analysis, both textual and graphic content in the posts. So we came up with 4 main categories of analysis, and of course some subcategories that you see presented in this table. We wanted to examine steps and types of actions Ukraine has been taken to address Russian cyber aggression. So we were looking at the posts of these two channels, Telegram channels, Stop Russia Mria and Internet Armed Forces, and analyzed what actions they asked to perform by their subscribers and audience, what reasons they articulated or they could be clearly understood from their posts that they wanted to present to the audience, what objects of the counterattacking and what platforms they use for counterattacking. And we also wanted to take a look at types of content they present, what types of content in terms of functions and visual presentation, and as well as strategic communication they presented. So we have some results of our analysis, and the first chart you see present the results on the category action asked. So we can say that these channels, they ask to perform different actions of their subscribers. The Mria Stop Russia channel, they want and ask to perform their subscribers such actions as block or ban the report in order to block or ban the channel or account in Telegram, or post demoralizing or trolling comments in order to counterattack hostile, in their opinion, accounts. Internet Armed Forces channel, you see, perform different actions. They ask to perform their subscribers different actions. Among them, the most important are campaigning against governments, persons, businesses who cooperate with Russia, or they ask to support Ukraine in different directions, like spreading awareness about Ukrainian war, inform about Ukrainian war. And we see that over the period of time of our analysis, it's changing. Yeah, the action they ask, the dynamics of this is changing. And Stop Russia channel shifted dominant attention from reporting social media to not asking any questions to perform by their subscribers. But Internet Armed Forces, they are more consistent, and they ask to campaign against Russia or in favor of Ukraine. Next slide, you see reasons for publishing, the results of the analysis in this category. And we see similar shift in the reasoning for publishing posts. In first month of war, the primary reason for Stop Russia channel was to combat disinformation, manipulative and hostile content. And for Internet Armed Forces, you see that the main reason was to campaign to prevail businesses and foreign governments and people from cooperating with Russia. They request for military help and for political support to Ukraine. But you see that at the end of the year, the priorities are changing, and both channels, they try, like their main reason they post their information, their content, is to keep the morale high of the subscribers. And it corresponds, we believe it corresponds with the previously observed tendency, decline in requesting subscribers to perform any action, but to concentrate on their successes and to cheer them up to see, and we will see the following pattern in other categories.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much, Katrina. And so as to the next category, we identified as the object of counterattack if asked in a post. And so regarding the first Stop Russia channel, the most largest number of posts was in the category no specific object identified. Then it's Russian social media. The next one is pro-Russian social media. And finally, Russian government, politicians, and military. And also it should be noted that Belarusian social media were targeted once as well in March 2022. And so the no specific object identified subcategory means that the instructions or for action or counteraction were not stated explicitly. And as to the second channel, the Internet Armed Forces of Ukraine, so here we also see that the largest number of posts was in the subcategory no specific object identified, and then foreign non-Russian governments, governments, politicians, or NGOs, then foreign non-Russian business, and finally foreign non-Russian celebrities or influencers. And in our opinion, we can explain possibly that the fact that the largest number of posts is in the category no specific object identified is that the channel authors assumed that the subscribers would figure out the instructions themselves, like based on the content or context of the post, and for this reason did not explicitly outline the instructions. Thank you so much, Katrina. And so the next category is platforms. So we looked at which platforms have been used for counter-attacking. And so regarding the first channel, Stop Russia, we see that the largest number of posts, again, was in the subcategory no specific object identified. And also other important platforms were Telegram, in fact, and then YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram, like respectively. As to the second channel, Internet Armed Forces of Ukraine, we see that the largest number of posts was related throughout the year, was related to such platforms as Instagram and Twitter, and others were Facebook, LinkedIn, and again, no specific object identified subcategory. And our next category, so we looked at the object, at the type of platform, and now the content. So which types of content were posted? And so here we see that consistently in both, for both Telegram channels, the most, the largest number of posts was in the subcategory call for action. Some kind of action was asked from the subscribers, from the volunteers. And the second one, so the second subcategory, as you see, is the greetings and appreciation, encouragement, joke, sarcasm subcategory. And this can be possibly explained, so the popularity of this subcategory, by the notion that sarcasm is also used as warfare in order to demoralize the opponent, while encouragement and motivation are highly important in order to keep the morale of subscribers high and to keep going. And further important subcategories, as you see, are information and poll. Information, just spreading some information again, like among the volunteers, and poll. So polling was done in order to monitor and to get feedback from subscribers in order to check the channel performance and to strategize as to further steps.
Okay, and we also took a look at the types of graphic content presented in the channels, and you see from the chart that in this category we observe the beginning of the war, the first month of the war, that no graphic content dominated in majority of posts, but by the end of the year we observed the rise of usage memes, screenshots, infographics, edited images, especially in December in the Stop Russia channel, and we believe this is also connected to the main reason to keep the morale high, because they wanted to cheer up, to present successes in this kind of way. Internet Armed Forces channel, you see they are more consistent in the types of information they present, and the majority of posts they use edited images, and that edited images were supporting they asked actions to perform and to help them to campaign against Russia or in favor of Ukraine. And the last category we took a look was the type of strategic communication. Since the channels are led and formed by governmental forces, governmental agencies, we wanted to take a look what strategic types of communication they use and what are that dominate. The most used type of communication, strategic communication, was information operation, followed by psychological operation. But once it was used a special operation just once, and that was very peculiar case. the Stop Mria channel, they asked their subscribers to inform, through using the chatbot, to inform the locations of Russian military vehicles and equipment. It was once, but it was also asked to be extra careful while performing this task. And the same tendency we see in the Internet Armed Forces channel, that information operations followed by psychological operation. We believe this also coincide with the other categories, results in other categories, and dynamics in that categories that, of course, spreading information, campaigning, awareness campaigning was like the primary reason of operating of these channels. So yes, Ksenia, join us, and some conclusions that we want to present.
Yes, I would like to just draw out the results of our research by answering some of our research questions. The answer to the first research question is: Ukrainian government and civil society joined their efforts in countering Russian cyber aggression by organizing volunteer Telegram channels, so-called cyber army or IT army, Internet Armed Forces. Predominant aims of these government-led volunteers are to combat disinformation campaign against Russia and request support to Ukraine.
And as to our second research question, so the answer is that Ukraine uses predominantly cyber operation in the broad sense, and addresses both cyber and kinetic threats in order to counter Russian cyber aggression.
And as for two last questions, we came to the conclusion that Telegram is used by Ukraine in countering Russian cyber aggression as a communication tool, first of all, as a platform between communication platform between government and volunteers, and among volunteers themselves for coordinating their efforts. It also used as a tool to target Russian and pro-Russian Telegram channels and accounts as anonymously targeting and banning disinformation, propaganda, hostile, harmful, and sensitive content. And it's also used as a way to publicize among general public the successful cases of counteraction and enhance further resilience. And the last question we were looking at, the types of strategic communication, we believe that information operations like spreading awareness, informing about the war, and psychological operations like trolling, demoralizing the enemy, keeping the morale high of the cyber forces, it dominates as types of strategic communication among these government-led channels. So that was our last slide. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Please, Oksana and Yuri. So we have a Q&A, a conversation. I invite everyone to ask questions to individual presenters or to all of them. People on Zoom or in the room. Yes, please. There's a microphone coming. Yes.
Oksana Chabanyuk.
We can
If
hear
you
you.
can speak in the microphone so that people on Zoom.
Better?
Yes.
I would like to ask you whether you were able to determine the primary reason for this massive involvement, this building involvement in the Soviet Union by American companies, whether this was an primary and ideological reason, support for the Soviet Union, or whether it was an economic thing, since that was the time also when there was the Depression in the U.S. and building was difficult.
Thank you so much. Your question is very deep and very interesting. Part of the answers are already in your question, because yes, here it was the lack of work, and that's why for instance, American associates were interested in all those contracts. That they were with very high prices. as well as Ford. He was hesitating, has he to participate in the contracts between Soviet Union and the US. But he was not supporting the Soviet Union. He was interested mostly in the work and the earnings, you know. So, but at the same time, the Soviet Union actually was not able to, first of all, achieve the tasks which was set by the communists without any involvement of the technologies which they didn't have. First of all, in the agriculture, how to work on fields, not having machineries, as well as how to provide electricity, not having power plants, electric power plants. But at the same time, we know that although most of the technologies or most of the equipment and plants as well had kind of second purpose to use. So to be able to produce lately military equipment. So, but at the same time, all of those ideological and economical situations of all participants were playing in this field. Yes.
In the back, yeah.
Hi, thank you all so much. My question is for the last presentation. It seems like between the two channels, there were different strategies. So I'm wondering if you had any thoughts about why that was the case. Is it because perhaps there were different audiences who were subscribing to those channels? Just any thoughts about that? And congratulations on a really wonderful project.
Thank you. I might answer.
Yeah, go
so
ahead.
We do think they have different audiences, and the government agencies are different who control this. We believe formed and lead these channels because the Internet Armed Forces channel is controlled by two ministries, and their instructions to the subscribers are really rigorous, are really step by step. It takes like more time and efforts to campaign, you know, not just report the channel or try to post some kind of comments, but be very specific and very determined to campaign against certain businesses or to campaign for Russia, against Russia or for Ukraine. So we do believe there are different audiences, but haven't looked at that, but definitely it's really interesting to take a look on that.
Yeah, and thank you so much. Brian, thank you very much for, I would like to say thank you for your leadership and your guidance during this year. So yes, I just followed up on Katrina's comment exactly, and we also, I just can add that the fact that both channels are still there, they are still active, and so the war goes on and the activity still goes on, and both, apparently, yes, there are different audiences, and there are, I guess, it's the part of the general strategy, different audiences and different types of tasks, different purposes. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all, really great presentations. My question's for Yuri. I was wondering if, in the 1920s, the settlement of the Jewish in the agrarian areas of Ukraine was related at all to the kind of similar settlement that happened in Israel with the kibbutzim, given that the funding was similar from the American Jewish communities, and if you could speak to that relationship.
Yes, thank you so much. It's a great question. It's also a part of my research. So today I just had possibility to show you some very brief my topic of my research, because it's topic of my book, future book, and of course I'm talking in my book. I'm trying to show the situation not only in Ukraine but abroad too, with connection with this American charitable organizations, because they are also provide support not only for Ukrainian Jews, but other settlements in Argentina, for example, or in Palestine during this process of resettlement. Yeah. And in Soviet Ukraine during this 1920s, it was like a time when two main projects for Jews were realizing, because Soviet government and joint from New York, they gave possibility people to resettle to southern part of Ukraine. But on another hand, we can talk about Zionistic movement in the world, and many Zionistic organizations which were in Ukraine during 1920s, they provide agitation to resettle for resettlement Jews not to southern Ukraine but to Palestine. And sometimes it was like conflict of interests, you know, between this Zionistic movement and people who decided to move to southern part of Ukraine. Actually, some of them later moved to Palestine before World War II. But many of the inhabitants decided to stay in Ukraine, and it's very interesting question. I try to show that it was like their decision not to return back to Israel, to Palestine. And some people say that for us now Dnipro River is our Jordan, you know. So it shows us that many people in Ukraine they believe they will have a happy future in Ukraine, but then Soviet regime, Nazi regime destroyed their world. Yeah, thank you.
Yuduk?
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm really pleased to see all of you in the same, setting. I have a question for the final presentation. We all know that there is a kind of the state control on mass media in Russia, but as you know, the Telegram is a kind of SNS, which is free for everybody. Do you think many Russians have the access to Telegram to get actual information on war in Ukraine? And that's the second question, first question. And second question is, I used to watch Russia Today. Russia Today is kind of English broadcasting run by Russian government. Several years ago, my impression was it looks like Al Jazeera, Deutsche Welle, France 24. It's just kind of English channel which struggle to have kind of a neutral stance. But when war broke out in February last year, the attitude of that channel is completely changed, and that channel emission a kind of propaganda, and just 2-3 weeks later, it stopped. I mean, the YouTube just stopped and remove that channel from the YouTube service. Do you think Russia Today, I mean, the broadcasting, is a part of, it work as a part of a propaganda for the Russian government, or is still struggle to have kind of having neutral stance for the what happened in Russia and Ukraine?
So I may maybe start answering, and my colleagues will join. So first question was about Telegram and its audience. Yes, indeed, anyone can join any Telegram channel. And that's a challenge for us to understand who is an audience there, actually. And this is a challenge for administrators of for example, these two channels to conduct what they are doing, to campaign, thank you, to campaign against Russia, because obviously Russians can also access these channels. So it's really tricky. And we also didn't mention that, but there is a Russian tail in Telegram itself, right? Because we know who founded this social media. A lot of questions, but we wanted to take a look how Ukraine uses it, how Ukraine utilizes the possibilities of Telegram to counterattack. Because if we look at the opposite opposite side, a lot of Telegram channels from Russian side who attack Ukrainian audience, and there is a question how we can determine whether it's a Ukrainian or Russian Telegram channel. A lot of questions to that, but we specifically wanted to take a look at Ukrainian, and we know for sure, because that was in media, we have proof that these specific two channels, they are led by Cyber Police of Ukraine and Ministries of Ukraine. So we knew for sure that these two channels are verified, and we can specifically take a look at what they do. And as for your second question, Russia Today, I mentioned several agencies, several non-governmental and governmental organizations since 2014 who were analyzing the content of Russian media. And we have a lot of evidence that Russia Today, since 2014, campaigned against Ukraine, spreading disinformation and propaganda against Ukraine internationally, which is the most, for us Ukrainians, the most dangerous and unfortunately so bad that a lot of international audiences were exposed and are still exposed to Russia Today and Sputnik, to like two primary Russian television channels, very, very, as you said, very well widespread. And yes, indeed, this is a Russian state television channel, which we believe has a lot of propagandistic and disinformation content. Do you want to add anything?
I just add a couple of things that, we know that Telegram right now is a free social media, but it's also anonymous, but it also can be, it's like a dual-use weapon. Of course, we examined only one side, how it's used for deterrence, but of course it can be, and it is used for propaganda also against Ukraine. And, but there is also, I would like to admit that some evidence of technical restriction of social media, in some countries, and it also is evidence that it might be going on already. It's going on, and it will be more severe in the Russian Federation as well. So right now it's free, but we don't know how it will develop, and it's a very possible development that the social media will be more controlled in the Russian Federation.
Thank you very much for this question. Indeed, I just can follow up and say that indeed, regarding just the way Telegram is set up, so yes, the matter is, it's like one of, again, the strengths and the weaknesses in general of such types of platforms is this encryption, the fact that one can create like anonymous groups, like this anonymity. So, and it has been studied, in fact, like in other contexts as well, other regions and countries. For example, yes, there can be, and there are groups which like were and like are being created and used for like many like different social groups, like diasporas and like other, but well, all sorts of like social groups. And so yes, on the one hand, it's very good that there is no like censorship because it's encrypted and basically, let's say not no one, but very like, limited number of people knows about the content of this like a certain group channel, but depending on settings. But on the other hand, yes, there is this risk of of like some undercover activities, and we just think that this are probably, again, this ongoing confrontation between democracy and autocracy, and between open society and kind of society with more restrictions. And I guess it's just up to like all of us, I guess, people to like in many countries to make good use of this tool. And as to the second question about the propaganda, yes, exactly. Of course, there's also a notion, there were studies about actually the ecosystem of Russian propaganda. And yes, it concerns, there are at least like 5 pillars identified, and those concern like state-led channels, information channels, like social media and other types of content used in order to promote this Russian propaganda. And unfortunately, well, we can say, yes, that RT, Russia Today, is still very active in many regions of the world. So in the European Union in particular, it was banned, like after the full-scale invasion, and given, well, of course, taking into consideration all the previous cases of like Russia, like interference into elections and various like disinformation threats affecting democratic countries. And so, but many other regions, unfortunately not. For example, in Latin America, it's a huge issue, and Russia today is being widely used there. And so it's a challenge for us, like for Ukrainians, for like other peoples supporting democracy to counter it and to promote truthful narratives or debunk some myths.
I would like to, we will conclude, we have like 5 minutes. I would like to ask 3 questions, and you can use this as a way to conclude. So I will start, unfortunately for Oksana, I will start with the last paper because it's a follow-up question. So you were talking about Russian propaganda, but Russian propaganda on Telegram can also be done by non-Russians. And I'm thinking about Americans participating in Russian propaganda who willingly, willfully, or unwillfully are contributing to this. So if you think of Fox News, for example, that's repeating Russian propaganda, but that can also then infiltrate social media used in Russia and in Ukraine. So I would like you to think about or tell us what you think about that. My second question is to Yuri, and is about the impact of the war also on the remaining Jewish population of Ukraine. There's been a large exodus after the fall of the Soviet Union of Jews making Aliyah, going to Israel. But we're seeing a lot of Jews who had remained in Ukraine, and the Jewish Ukrainian population is very active, was very prominent, nothing to do with what is going on, for example, in Poland, Hungary, or other former Soviet bloc countries. So do you have any inkling or numbers of Jewish communities in Ukraine now that are being disseminated by either war and death, but also people leaving? And finally, Oksana, given your expertise on housing, how do you see your research having an impact on thinking about the reconstruction of Ukrainian cities like Kharkiv, but other places where housing is going to be a key issue to think about people returning to Ukraine and remaining in the areas that have been most affected by the war? So maybe we'll start with Oksana and then end.
Thank you so much. Yes, it's a very important question, especially taking into consideration the amount of people which fled from the cities which were mostly destroyed, like Mariupol and Kharkiv as well, as the city that is very close to the Russian border, like 32 kilometers only. And this is the question of the debates now. What tendencies and what concepts have to be implemented, how investigated had to be all the damages, what categories of the buildings, there are categories of the damages of the buildings, and then finalizing the reports, the decisions could be made, will the certain building must be rebuilt, or it can be reconstructed. But in general, it's very important also to understand what new features in rebuilding of houses have to be implemented, have to be introduced. Like, we will still live near the neighbor that does unexpected threats for civilians. So, of course, what kind of in some cases, new neighborhoods have to be designed with what kind of shelters or what kind of structures, what kind of materials, what density, what height, and all that matters in case-by-case level.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to say that I don't have any official contemporary data about the count of Jewish population in Ukraine, but according to official information, maybe more than 20 years ago, in Ukraine were near 100,000 Jews, how many of them left Ukraine during last years, and how many people were born in Jewish families. I don't have this official information, but what I can say, answering your question, it's that in almost every Ukrainian region, in big cities, we have some local Jewish communities. Like, for example, in Kherson, where I'm from, I was born in Dnipro, but last year lived in Kherson. In Kherson, we have a Jewish community which unites near 2,000 of people. And I want to say that during this war, many of these people also were evacuated from Kherson during the Russian occupation and after liberation, because it's a dangerous place until today. And some of these people, they moved to Odessa, for example, closest, more safety city, or went abroad. And I want to mention that this Jewish organization in Ukraine, they provide help and aid not only for their community, but also for all Ukrainians, all locals who need this help. And it's not only Ukrainian example. A couple of weeks ago, we had this great meeting with heads of Jewish community from Kharkiv, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And they present how Polish Jewish community also help Ukrainian refugees. So this is my answer, and I just want to add to conclude that from my research, and it's clear that history, memory, it's a very important thing in our world. Until today, we see that it could be sometimes very dangerous, because knowledge about the past, in our case the history of World War II, could be instrumentalized like a weapon in the informational war, in hybrid war. And also I'm studying the topic about the mass crimes and genocide. I would say that all of us know this slogan, the "Never Again," which until today just slogan, because we have several examples of genocide during our history after the Second World War, and it looks like it's happening again. So we're still looking for a possibility to prevent these crimes in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I will just probably address very shortly their issue of their Russian narratives in their non-Russian sources, as far as I understand. I can comment on this in the following way, that there are really their well-known initiatives by the Russian Telegram bloggers, for example, who translate their blogs and into their foreign languages, and also disseminate them in other countries. So other listeners who not speak in Russian, they can also understand this. And as for their other countries, like other politicians who are sometimes proceeding with Russian agenda, this is also manifestation of the hybrid war, because it's also not only done in their informational field, not in the cyber field, but also in economic, in their diplomatic field, and this is just a pure manifestation of what is happening, because so far you can understand that Russian aggression is not fully recognized, not by all countries. Russian war crimes are not fully recognized, and not all everybody want to to set out the tribunal. So this is our effort to make this crime sound, and to finally help Ukraine and to prosecute the crimes that are being committed and to recognize them. So this is only one dimension, but that's why we want to also acknowledge all the other dimensions, the part of the cyber war.
I just wanted to add to what you, Genevieve, just described about American audience being exposed to Russian narratives, but they go further. They involve Americans into their narratives, and if you can take a look at what they present, they invite so-called experts from American military, from American political circles, to comment what is going on in Ukraine and what they do. And very important to debunk that experts' speeches And I mentioned in the presentation the Center for Countering Disinformation in Ukraine. And I see that we need to promote the work of the center more and more, because what they do, they take certain narrative, they very in detail describe it, debunk the narratives and the structure of it. And they talk about the experts, American experts, so-called experts, I would say, because they talk what they want to be talked about. They don't express different points of view. They are not balanced, they are not neutral at all. So as I want to support Ksenia's point that we need to be cautious and to talk more and more about this in any possible way and audience, and of course in foreign languages, because the center works on Ukrainian audience. It's important to present their work on, of course, on Ukrainian audience, but international audience is very important to target too.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And just very briefly, so I would just look at this issue from two perspectives, so short-term and long-term solutions to disinformation challenges. And so as to short-term perspective, yes, of course, there should be investigation and prosecution of those responsible for instigating any hate speech and any kind of propaganda which results in violence. And in long-term perspective, I would say that critical thinking and media literacy are crucial, especially starting from the very early age, maybe even starting like kindergarten courses, and those do exist now. And also, of course, education. We are now at the university, and we are very grateful to the University of Michigan and Weiser Center for Europe and Eurasia. So I do believe in the power of education. Of course, it's not a panacea. It's not a immediate solution against all violence and crime, but this can definitely alleviate, we think. Thank you.
Well, I think that's the perfect words of conclusion. I want to thank everyone here and online for coming to this event. And before concluding, I would like again to thank our speakers, but also please let your students know that the scholars will be teaching at the Center for Russian, East European, and Eurasian Studies courses in the fall and the winter. It's 400 levels, so advanced undergraduate students and graduate students can enroll. And I would like to give, I think your mentor is here, right?
Yes.
So Professor Weeks, we have a token of appreciation. It's not much, but it's from the bottom of our heart.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Thank you.
Claire left.
Yes, she left, yes.
Yes.
I will give her.
John.
Thank you very much.
And Poland.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And we wish all the best to Anna. Please keep in touch.
Thank you.
And
Thank
we
you.
will see the 4 other fellows next year. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.